It includes interviews with the elderly from around the world. I'm Tracy Sable with EWTN News Nightly. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line with today's host, Colin Donovan. In North America, call toll-free 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000 or send an email to openline@EWTN.com.
Well, happy Friday to each and every one of you. Thanks so much for tuning in to EWTN's Open Line. Our very own Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan, on this Friday before Christmas Day, is in the house, ready to answer your questions. If you'd like to talk to Colin, the toll-free number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985, and we'll put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can always send us an email, openline@EWTN.com, or you can text your question to Colin. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Type your first name and your question, message, and data rates may apply. I'm Jack Williams. Michael McCall producing the program. Your call screener is Jeff Burson, I'm guessing. And Jeff is probably also handling our social media efforts. So if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook Live, then you can type a question into the chat window, and we may get to it by the end of the program. And our host, as he is every single Friday, our very own Vice President of Theology, the Saskatchewan Streak, Colin Donovan.
Well, I don't know that I streak anymore, or that I ever did for that matter, but thank you for that introduction.
Well, Colin, the vaccine is upon us. So several companies.
It is.
Operation Warp Speed. Several companies have been working on vaccines to attack the COVID-19 virus.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you start talking vaccines, we as devout Catholics have to look a little bit behind the veil and determine exactly how these vaccines were developed. And you are the world's foremost bioethicist who hosts Open Line Friday.
Well, that much is true. I guess you could say I'm also the foremost, astrophysicist or alien who hosts, whatever you want, I guess.
That's right. That's exactly right. But you did have some thoughts that you wanted to try to shed a little light on.
Yeah, I did, because that actually is, moral theology was my specialty at the Angelicum. So although the degree is in theology general, it comes with a specification to a branch of theology. And I've looked at this, and I think the statements that we're seeing, for example, from bishops' conferences, National Catholic Bioethics Center, we're talking about that a little offline, those have been very good summaries of the moral situation. But I think for those who don't want to dive into the long letters and so on that conferences and others for explanations that they produce, sort of summarize that here. I think everyone realizes that vaccination as itself is a good thing. We've been proving since the late 1800s, when the smallpox vaccine was developed and so on, that it can have a remarkable effect at eradicating disease. And certainly it can do it with seasonal diseases such as the flu and so on, although there are obviously scientific complications in knowing just exactly what to do for those viruses. But the general point that the use of a vaccine is a morally good thing as far as the church is concerned. One can speak of it in specific terms as whenever we have to make a decision about doing anything, we can qualify a moral act as integrally whole, in other words, good throughout, if the action is good, if our intention is good, and if the circumstances in which we do it, intend it, are fitting to what it is that we're doing. So obviously, in the case as a general statement, and just for a moment separated from all the other complications of the vaccination subject that you hear endlessly about in our society, but separated from all of that, in and of itself, vaccination from disease is a morally good act. So that's the first part of an integrally whole good action, that the act itself is morally good. The purpose, the intention of it, that's the second part. In other words, for preservation of our own life or our own health, as the case may be. Not all diseases are life-threatening, of course. This one is. For the good of others, the good of others' life and health, or the common good, you could put it that way as well. Obviously, that's a good intention to do it for that. So there, those two items. The third thing is the circumstances. And here we're talking objectively. Objectively, the criterion by which we use vaccinations are obviously its utility, effectiveness, its safety, the risks, all of the things that you talk to your doctor about when he says you should do this therapy or that therapy or this procedure or that procedure. You weigh the circumstantial factors and you say, this is good for me, or no, this is no good for me. That decision at that point is a subjective part of it that depends on the patient. But objectively, you're looking at the factual questions of necessity, effectiveness, safety, and so on and so forth. Now, that would be just a normal vaccine. The COVID vaccines, the question is raised, as has been raised with others, such as the rubella, the chickenpox, tetanus, that's the DTaP, and some of the other vaccines. And that is, in the 1960s, there were a couple abortions that were done. The woman chose it for medical reasons. That was what was lawful in those days. They were done, and when they were finished, so the tissue was provided to researchers for investigative purposes and so on. Those researchers then went off and they created cell lines, and those cell lines have been perpetuated down through the years so that scientists can use a human tissue for testing purposes and so on. And in some vaccine, it's actually part of the growth medium process of vaccination. It's nonetheless quite distant causally from those abortions. You're not embracing the abortion in taking it, using it, which would be a wrong intention to say, well, I'm taking it because it's derives at some distance from an abortion. But rather that you're saying that, you're taking it for the health benefits of it. Now, the difficulty is that there is any connection at all. And the Church, the Holy See, specifically in a document in 2006 from the Pontifical Academy for Life, and you see this reference, I think, in the English bishops and the U.S. Bishops' Conference statements. They speak about this being remote cooperation. I think more specifically, you describe it as remote mediate cooperation. In other words, you're using a means, it's strictly material, you're not intending it, and it's remotely connected to the abortions. In other words, it's not, the children were not aborted, and then the providers or the researchers said, oh, hey, let's get some aborted tissue. We're going to do this, and then produce fairly immediately. We heard a couple of years ago from David DeLayden and his group about Planned Parenthood actually selling of this tissue, direct kinds of aborted tissue and even organs directly to medical supply and researchers and so on. That would be grave. That's not remote. That's immediate material cooperation in those abortions. So that's of a different and gravely immoral category. But the Holy See and the bishops' conferences, in repeating this teaching, which is somewhat standard moral theology, have talked about the remote material level of this, that for a serious reason, as protecting one's life and health is, and protecting the life and health of others, that for that serious reason, letting those who give you the vaccination and those who might ask you about you're taking the vaccination, that you're doing this for those health reasons and not in order to flatter or in any way support those abortions, this is morally justified. In other words, the bottom line is we do not sin if we take vaccines that are so connected. Now, the two vaccines that are out there seem, by general estimation, not.
It's EWTN's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
I'm really a revert. There are a lot of converts on Catholic radio, a lot of reverts, those who have come back to the faith. And ever since I came back to a practice of my faith, I started praying the rosary, going to even daily Mass, God has led me on an amazing journey and used me in a lot of incredible ways that I never dreamed would have been possible.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, tonight, midnight Eastern on EWTN Radio.
This is Life Issues with Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute.
4 pro-life groups have reported that 2 lead COVID vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, did not use cells from aborted babies to develop their products. But misleading stories have surfaced to cast aspersions on the Pfizer vaccine. One is the 2-dose regimen isn't safe for pregnant or nursing women, but every vaccine excludes pregnant women from trials out of an abundance of caution, not because of any known risk. Another story reported doctors filed a claim to stop Pfizer's testing because of potential fertility concerns. But according to stem cell expert Dr. David Prentice, their evidence is faulty and their claims are unfounded. Visit lifeissues.org and click on the microphone icon for more details about this information.
Follow us on Twitter at Life Issues USA and stay informed, more informed than you've ever been.
Apparently, Michael McCall only knows one song, The Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, and he brings us back with that yet again today, The Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. And just like yesterday when I said Father Larry, when you look at the two of us standing next to each other, the first thing that comes to your mind, I'm sure, is The Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies, and it is equally applicable to you and me, Colin. I think we're very Baryshnikov-esque, and we could
certainly are. In fact, I'm going to see the Nutcracker this evening.
Yeah, well, there you go. Anyway, welcome to EWTN's Open Line Friday. If you ever miss an episode of Open Line or any other of your favorite EWTN radio shows, never fear. You can check out the podcast, and you can actually even subscribe to the podcast and have reminders sent directly to your email box. You can check it all out at EWTN.com/radio/podcasts. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Wide open phone lines at 833-288-3986. Pick up the phone and give us a call about the vaccine or about any other theological question that you may have for Colin Donovan. And Colin, you were kind of laying out why it has been determined, for the most part, that it would be morally acceptable for Catholics to take the vaccine that has recently been released.
Right. And as I was noting, the two that have been talked about for the United States, at least, the Pfizer, of course, and Moderna, I'm sure they'll be everywhere before too long. The Pfizer specifically, I think, is from the UK, have this remote material connection, or at most they have that. And it doesn't really matter as far as the morality of using the vaccine, given the pandemic. And I think that's the point that the bishop's statements and the statements of the Holy See have been trying to make. is that we're permitted to do this. We know there are high-risk individuals. We know we're parts of a community with high-risk individuals. That this is objectively something that we can use. And this is not a statement. And here's the clear thing. This is the condition that has always been associated with this use. If there is an ethical one available, and as I said, it's controverted whether either of these are unethical. That's neither here nor there as far as using them, but it is controverted. But where an ethical one is available, one should make the choice of that one. Where there is the choice, only the opportunity to use one that may be clouded with this issue, then you may use that. And this is what the circumstances may or may not be here. But I'm just saying, as we get more of these things becoming available, that's the question people can ask themselves. This remote material connection is not an obstacle by necessity and with protest. That's the key thing, that we protest. And I've told my doctors, and we should tell our doctors that we want to use the ethical versions of these vaccines. The trouble is that we haven't had this kind of pressure in this country, and so they've not been making these available. Thankfully, the Trump administration did give an orientation to the companies that we should make these available without the use of the fetal tissue substrates and so on and so forth, so that people would not have any objection to using them. But even if that remote connection is available, then we may use them. Now, there is in this, and the English and the American bishops have alluded to, there is the subjective element. And that is, the patient has to decide. Some people have medical conditions that argue against it. Some people may be pregnant or nursing. Those may be issues. Just like with any medicine you take, they give you this long list of things. And on the specifically looking at the Pfizer label the other day, they simply said it is not known, for instance, whether this would have any effect on fertility. That doesn't mean that it causes infertility or anything like that. It means that if they've just developed this thing, they have no idea what's going to happen in 6 months or a year and a half or whatever. Doesn't mean it will happen, but they have no evidence of it so far, and probably simply because it's been a short trial period. So those kinds of warnings are attached to all drugs, and so those are considerations the patient with their doctor should consider. And in the end, subjectively, it is the responsibility of the person to consider, become well informed, and consider whether for them this is something that they want to use. And then there is this element of protest. For some people, there may be what's called a moral impossibility of using it. In other words, they are so revulsed by even this remote connection that although they know it's moral for them and others to use it, they simply want to have nothing to do with this vaccine. And I can think of one notable person, Abby Johnson, who has made a statement to that effect, and I respect absolutely that opinion. She has chosen to go that route, to make this an absolute protest. And so she should be respected for that, and that's her right to do that. But I think whenever people make that choice, it should be not to be the occasion of pressure to make that choice, but rather that this is the choice that the patient can make. They want to make that protest. They should protest to their doctors if they get the vaccine, and they may choose that for themselves, they want to have nothing to do with it. Now, all such choices come with obligations themselves, because if you're not using, a means like vaccination, then you have ordinary means that you can do, and that's follow the public health guidelines. So I think people who make that choice then have a responsibility to be especially careful, particularly with regard to the risk group people. So I think morally, as a general matter, that's what you can say about it. The details of the various vaccinations are somewhat in flux, but as I said, at this time, the first two in the United States seem to fall into, if not the ethical category purely, then at least into the remote material cooperation with the aborted fetal tissue acquisition in the 60s and the use of that for the purposes of preserving one's own health and the health of others and the common good, one can make that choice. And I think that's the bottom line. This is going to end up being an individual decision of patients. They should be well informed, and they should consider their decision equally well and make a conscientious one. And that is how we should proceed, obviously, in all serious decisions, and even in general, ordinary moral decisions, to make good, conscientious decisions, and ask the Lord's help, pray about it.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free phone number. It's a free phone call anywhere in North America, 833-288-3986. Anna Marie is watching on YouTube, Colin, and she says, what happened to the celebration of the expectation of Our Lady?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's kind of called the Feast of the Immaculate Conception now, or...
No, I think that's having to do with her being pregnant, doesn't it? See, this is going back to when I was a child and you were a child. You weren't even a Catholic child, as I seem to recall you. Conversion came later in life. But right. I vaguely remember that feast, and those who participate in the extraordinary forum certainly will, so maybe one of them will call in and enlighten us. But in terms of being on the extraordinary calendar, which I'll presume for the sake of argument that it is, and not on the ordinary calendar that is used in most parishes, that usually had to do with there was a large number of feasts of various kinds, especially for Our Lady. And some of those have become optional memorials, and some of those have just simply been removed from the general calendar. Doesn't mean you can't celebrate them. And in fact, the extraordinary form celebrants do that. But it does mean that you may not see it in your parish unless you have an extraordinary form mass being celebrated there.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Ready to take your phone calls, and you can always, like we always say, you can send us an email, openline@EWTN.com. We have an email here from Jack, clearly a brilliant emailer. And he says, should we take everything Jesus says in Scripture literally or as parables? Is it truly his body he refers to, or is he being metaphorical?
Jesus came to us in human form, as St. Paul tells us in Philippians. And so we treat what he said in the way we would treat the speech of others. He uses simile, he uses hyperbole, he uses metaphor, he uses symbols, and so on. So first of all, we have the question of discovering the literal meaning of what Jesus said. When he says, if your eye is a problem, pluck it out, does he really expect people to pluck out their eyes, say, if they use them for, immorally looking at things? No, we would say that's hyperbole. It makes a point that sins of the heart, of the eyes, if you will, are grave, can be grave matter too, and can, if unrepentant, lead us to hell. And so that's a very important consideration. So what the Church understands is the literal sense, which is in the papal encyclicals on the subject, such as that of Pius XII, the Second Vatican Councils, Dei Verbum, and so on, is quite different than what some Protestant theologies would hold, and that is, it's not the words as they would mean if you could look them up in a lexicon and discover exactly what they mean. That's the beginning of knowing. There's the context, there's obviously the intention of the speaker. Now, how do you get the intention of the speaker? You can look at the context and so on. There's one way the Lord gave us to get to the intention of the speaker. He gave us the apostles, and he promised them the Holy Spirit to lead them into all truth. This is why the church is necessary, because when it gets down to interpreting and understanding and putting these things together, you need the authority of the church to do it. What was Jesus' intention? For the church to say, as the bishops of the early church, the fathers did, that it was not plucking out your eye, for example, or that it was the body and blood of Christ, truly speaking. That's an important interpretive tradition that's been passed on in the church. Otherwise, simply looking for the literal can lead you astray either to one way or the other.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. It's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
Father Benedict Groeschel.
No Catholic can support abortion, and that Catholics are responsible to take serious action against legalized abortion.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
When God's people were in exile and they're about to come home and rebuild their fallen city of Jerusalem, they were going to be attacked by all the neighboring nations. I mean, when the city walls had fallen in the ancient world, this was a big deal. It was extremely dangerous. You needed those walls to keep you alive. So when they were about to go home and rebuild their fallen city, Nehemiah told them, the joy of the Lord must be your strength. Guys, this was not a joy that was put on rose-colored glasses and pretend everything's fine. You have no problems to really deal with. Just feel happy and that's it. No. He was talking to people who knew they might go home and die trying to rebuild that city. Joy has to be your strength. Of all the things that it's important for you to do right now, self-care, those things that make you feel balanced, the things that feed your spirit, that time in prayer, the time in working out, the time talking to friends, these things are utterly crucial because more than money, more than a good plan, more than the security that comes from the world, the joy of the Lord is going to keep you strong right now. Stay in that joy.
For more, text Chris at 44144. This is Chris Stefanik on EWTN Radio.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
You know, I have never seen women who want to be equal absolutely degrading themselves. And yet the media degrades your nature, your beauty as a woman, your goodness. Let us pray. At some point, our dear Lord touches their hearts.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Hi, this is Dr. David Anders. If you just don't understand something about the Catholic faith, Call to Communion is the show for you. Join us Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Now back to Open Line with Colin Donovan.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Couple of open phone lines for you at 833-288-3986. First up is Christina in Bakersfield, California, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Christina, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hi.
Hey, Christina. What's your question?
My uncle was... Oh, sorry. I was calling because my uncle was telling me about a dye that's being used in the vaccine called Lucifer Yellow, and talking about microchips and all kinds of stuff, but apparently this dye will make it so they can track who's actually gotten the vaccine. And I Googled it, and it's a real dye. Have you heard anything?
No, I think you accurately described it as conspiracy theory kind of stuff. I've not heard of it. I don't know why they would put a dye in a vaccine. That's not any part of any of the ethical issues that Catholic moral theologians and the bishops' conferences are discussing and looking at, which has purely to do with these cell lines taken from aborted fetal tissue in the 60s. Possibly the 70s. And none of these other considerations. So no, I haven't heard of that. And what sounds rather odd about that is you're going to a doctor or a hospital, you're getting a shot, you're becoming part of his database. Why would they need to put a dye in something? They're going to know every single human being on the planet who's received the vaccine if somebody wanted to collate that data. Now, probably they will anonymize it for statistical purposes so that, it's not like somebody will have the, Jack Williams on the database of people in the United States who used it or something like that. But they will know that a certain number of people, what the incidence of usage and stuff is. I don't see how a dye would be connected to that, and I know nothing about that claim whatsoever.
Thanks, Christina. We appreciate that phone call. That opens up a line for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Next up is Kathy in Edmond, Oklahoma, listening on Oklahoma Catholic Radio. Kathy, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hi, Colin. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure, you're welcome. I've been to Edmond.
The reason I was calling is my neighbor and I have discussed, what we're going to do at our time of our death, and she and her husband want to be cremated, and they mentioned they were just going to cast their ashes out in their yard or something like that. And I said, I don't think you're supposed to. We're both Catholic, and I said, I think that they need to be reserved in a blessed place. But when I looked in the catechism, I didn't find anything specific about that. Could you direct me where it talks more about that?
Well, it's in the liturgical law, so the catechism can't discuss, all of those kinds of things. But, if you look at the treatment of the human body and the care that belongs to that and the dignity of it, that already gives you the idea that simply scattering the ashes is not permitted by the church. And in fact, it is not permitted. You can be cremated if that is your desire, provided, you're not doing it in contempt of the doctrine of the resurrection. Not that it would matter to God whether your particles are scattered over the earth or not. But that's unlikely that an ordinary practicing Catholic would have such an intention anyway. That was done as sort of Enlightenment kind of thinking, where they wished to show that they were showing complete revulsion for that primitive religion of Catholicism. But for the ordinary Catholic, then there is in the liturgical books, there is a funeral mass, there is a burial for cremated remains. Many parishes, as our Cathedral of St. Paul here in Birmingham, has the place, the columbarium, where the parishioners can be interred in that columbarium. A lot of cemeteries now have columbariums associated with it. So rather than being buried in the ground, your ashes are kept in the columbarium. It's a place to go. It's a place to, just on All Souls Day in the month of November, to go visit those places and pray for your family members. So that is what the Church wants Catholics to do. In fact, it requires Catholics to do that. So they should talk to their pastor about this idea and be discouraged from implementing it. I doubt that, I don't know, if I was a pastor, it's hard to know how you would get the remains if you didn't have some proper intention. Maybe some priest would hand them to you after the funeral. But I think if you follow the normal course of things, you would simply be told that that's not allowed.
Thanks, Kathy. We appreciate the call today. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Plenty of time for your phone calls at 833-288-3986. 3986. So you need to take your world's foremost bioethicist hosting Open Line hat off and put on your world's foremost metaphysics expert who's hosting Open Line Friday. Tim writes in, what is the meaning of eternity in the context of the end of time?
Well, in the context, not of the end of time, but in the context of itself, it means the eternal now. So in that strict sense, only God is in eternity. Aquinas and the medievals distinguish between the eternity in which God is and which is always present to God, and aeviternity, which is the angels and the saints, the blessed souls, the souls in purgatory, where there is still the experience of change. So it's not time and it's not eternity in the sense in which God has an experience of eternity where everything is present to him. So at the end of time, at the end of our life, our existence will not be one in time, but it will be an existence in this state in which nothing essentially in us will change, but accidentally there will be accidental change. We will know others, we will learn, we will greet others, we will have communication with others, and all of these things represent a change in us, but not an essential change. And so that's a way of distinguishing that. In fact, at the end of time, we're told that there will be a new heavens and a new earth which we will inhabit, but there will be no birthing, no dying, and no sickness, nothing. In other words, there will be nothing which will essentially change our beatitude, our state, after that point. Although we will have this experience of others, which is always growing, which will never end. But our essential characteristic of seeing God and being in God and having the state of charity, which we had when we died, none of that will ever change.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Kathy is in Indian River, Michigan. She's listening to us on Sirius XM Channel 130. Kathy, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment about your last speaker.
Mm-hmm.
That I heard on one of your other shows that you can't spread the ashes because you wouldn't take a body and cut a leg, if it wasn't cremated. You wouldn't cut a leg off and spread it here and take an arm and put it over there. That you can't spread the ashes of a human.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy into that as the reason. The reason is the sacredness of the person. The person was created in the image and likeness of God. The person, a Catholic, presumably consumed our Lord in the Holy Eucharist throughout their Catholic life, received him, and that gives them that special dignity as well. And so you would handle in a dignified way. Look at what the church does with the relics of the saints. Even though it does keep the different parts of the saints, it venerates them, it honors them. It celebrates the Mass on their altars where their remains are kept in the case of the saints that are interred in churches, as in the early church and the celebration of the Mass in the place where the martyrs were entombed in the catacombs. So that kind of recognition and respect is what is involved here, and not simply a material matter of where the parts go. As I said in that answer, it's not like God can't find all the parts. In fact, all the parts will become carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and become the parts of plants and animals that eat them. And so if it were a matter of keeping your cellular lineage intact in some way necessary for the resurrection, no, but it's a recognition that this is the body that returns to the ground from which it came, as we say on Lent. Remember, man, you are to dust, and to dust you shall return. That process takes place in a way that we can see the continuity of human life and of creation itself come from God and returning to God. When it's made a subject of use to decorate the mantle, or for some sentimental idea to spread the ashes on Mount Everest, or something like this, that doesn't show that kind of respect. So it's about the dignity of the human person, the person who receives our Lord in Holy Communion, and the respect that is due to them also after they die.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free telephone number. Pick up the phone and give us a call at 833-288-3986. That's what Mike did in Spokane, Washington, a first-time caller listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Mike, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hello, Father Donovan. My call is about... Oh, Mr. Donovan, okay. My call is about the Catholic faith and how it seems to be most aligned with the practice of the early Christian fathers. I've been a Protestant for all of my life, but it seems to be that aligning with Catholicism and in communing with the Catholic Church would be the best way for me to follow the Church fathers and become more like them. What are your thoughts about that?
Sure. All of the Church fathers would have described themselves as Catholic. You can need to look at Cyril of Jerusalem in his Mystagogias to talking about the, where the Catholic Church is and what is its nature and so on. Remember, we have in the creed that comes from the early councils, the definition of the Church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. In other words, the religion of Christ is not a religion for the Jews. It's not a religion for those who do adult baptisms only. It's not a religion only for those who believe certain doctrines regarding the Eucharist, although all of these things are encompassed in the religion that I'm going to conclude with. But it's a religion for everybody. It's the universal religion. The Jewish religion was for the Jews and those who converted to Judaism and accepted the practices of the Jews, circumcision, the Mosaic law, and so on and so forth. The Church is universal, and not in the sense that it's universal in a disorganized way, that we then pick and choose doctrines and practices, but that there is a body of leadership, or there's a body of sacraments, and there is a body of teaching that is traceable back to Christ, and you find it, as you correctly are identifying, in the Fathers. You would do well to read the works of what is now St. Cardinal Newman, because he started out as one of the most highly respected intellectuals in the Anglican Church, and he accepted the belief of the Anglican Church, what's called the branch theory, that it was one of the three great branches of the Christian Church. There are the Orthodox in the East, there are the Romans in the South, and then there are the English in the British Isles. That the Anglican Church, with its own governance and rules and all of that, was independent of these three, but yet it was all one Holy Catholic Church. So what did he do? He set out to prove, to demonstrate, polemically or apologetically, if you will, whatever that motive was, precisely the branch theory, that the Anglican Church had every bit as right to call itself Catholic as did the Roman Church. And in fact, if you look at the derivation of the title Roman Catholic, it is not, it does say something true about the Catholic Church, that the head of the Catholic Church on earth is in Rome. The head of the Catholic Church, heaven purgatory, and earth, of course, is in heaven, Christ. But on earth, that it is Rome. But it's just the Catholic Church. The Church just doesn't, in the Roman documents, in the Latin, they don't talk about, Catholico Romano or Ecclesia Romana, although that could be used. But it's just simply the Catholic Church. And when Newman set out, what did he prove? No. The church they were identifying as the Roman Church over against the Eastern Church, the Orthodox Church, over against the Anglican Church, that's the Church of Christ. So you have the continuity of belief, you have the continuity of the sacraments, you have the continuity of leadership. And you find that in the Fathers. On the point of the previous question regarding the Eucharist, you find in the 2nd century clearly the Catholic doctrine doesn't use words like transubstantiation that came from Peter Lombard and Aquinas and accepted by the Council of Trent. Doesn't contain those words, but in describing the nature of the Eucharist to the emperor as an apologetic point to the Emperor Antonius Pius, he explains that they receive the body and blood of Christ. He doesn't equivocate. Jesus didn't equivocate either, and that's going back to another question on the literal sense of Scripture. The Jews questioned his literal understanding of what he said, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you shall not have life in you. He didn't equivocate. He let him go. They wouldn't accept him. The apostles, at least, they had the good sense to think, well, there's more here than maybe that one statement of his made. We're going to stick with this fellow. But no. That's the teaching of Christ. That's the teaching of Justin Martyr in the 2nd century. It's the teaching of all the fathers and down through the line. And you can take each of the teachings, and even the more developed ones like the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption of Mary, or papal infallibility, or papal primacy, and you can trace out the lineage and the roots of those and the way the doctrinal development took place, that leads from the seeds planted in the Gospels and in the teaching of the apostles to the early fathers, to the later fathers, to the medieval fathers, to the modern church. All of these things that you'll find that continuity. So look up Newman. That'll help you a great deal, I think, in your pursuit.
Next up is Peter in Troy, Michigan, listening to EWTN on Ave Maria Radio. Peter, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Good afternoon, Colin. Just wanted to thank you for your mind-expanding and deep message about eternity and heaven and what we are to expect. You've given me so much to pray about and to meditate on.
Well, thank you. I stole most of what I know from Aquinas and others, but you're certainly welcome to look into Summa on that question, and he goes into it in that kind of detail if that was you found that particularly interesting.
God bless you, Peter. Thank you so much for the kind words. Next up is Christopher in Houston, Texas, listening to EWTN on Sirius XM Channel 130. Christopher, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. It's the first time calling, but I flip the show often. But I've listened to y'all talk about the dignity of the body, and this is the first time I've heard Donovan speak of it in terms of not scattering ashes as the dignity of Christ's Eucharist. My question is, how do you square it morally with organ donation?
As an act of charity. And so the popes, in answering that question, have referred to that. Obviously, there's a certain relativeness going on here. It's one thing to give a person a wonderful burial and to honor them. That's a great thing. That's a charity for them. That's a recognition of the sanctity of the body, the dignity of the person, and so on and so forth. But the person who then chooses, obviously in life, they say, well, I would like to donate my body, those organs that can be used, for the good of others. The church sees that as a charity that's not in contradiction to the other. What would be in contradiction would be a simple abuse of that body, the scattering of the ashes, the sentimentalizing of the remains by such an act. So those different purposes, you can weigh the relative good in each one of those. In fact, whether they offend against the dignity of the individual or not. And the church concludes that the charity of the gift, in fact, elevates the dignity of the person who gives. It certainly elevates their charity. They're making a gift on behalf of others, whereas the mistreatment of the body after death, in a way, does the opposite for those who do the mistreating. And so I think that's the way you would try to distinguish that.
Thanks, Christopher. We appreciate that call. Colin, in the last couple of minutes we have left here, we have an email from Melissa on Long Island, and she says, if the next president reverses the Hyde Amendment, as has been discussed, and taxpayers will now be
forced to pay for abortions?
Yeah, and I'm trying to... is refusing... Essentially, she's wondering if in that situation would conscience rights be violated to the point that we would be justified in refusing to pay our taxes?
The short answer is no. I bet the government has done all kinds of things with your tax money that you can't justify. You can make such a protest. The issue gets down to the common good. Now, granted, there are a lot of things government spends money on I could not agree with. But if you didn't pay your taxes, then think of all of the things that we do need that are necessary for the defense of our nation, the common good and the public order and so on, that would fall by the wayside without those taxes. So long story short, we do render to Caesar what is Caesar's. We can certainly protest it, but it falls into remote cooperation, like the vaccine case, in that, the material, the connection between the taxes that you pay in a $1 trillion budget and the misuse of those taxes for one item or two items, even though it's a war that you think is immoral. Some people have objected to wars we've conducted, or in this case, abortion, or something like this. There are ways of protesting that, and of course, the best way is to unelect the people who permit that. I don't know that that's going to happen. I know that one of the parties wants to make that happen. Since it's a matter of the law, it would be, I think, have to start with Congress. So, we can hope for a good result in Congress when that issue comes up, as it's very likely to.
Colin, let me wish you a very Merry Christmas, and we'll get together again in 2021, huh?
We will indeed. We will
All
indeed.
Right. On behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, our Vice President of Theology, our producer, Michael McCall, and our call screener and social media maven, Mr. Jeff Burson, I'm Jack Williams, taking this opportunity to wish each and every one of you a Merry Christmas as well. Finish Advent strong, still some time left to do that, and we'll be back at it again on Monday with John Martinoni talking scriptural apologetics. Until we get together next week, have a great weekend. God bless.